In this presentation, we're going to be talking about the impact of ultra-processed food. And a lot of the information that we're going to get for this specific lesson is going to come from a journal article that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, asking the question, does the concept of ultra-processed food help inform dietary guidelines beyond conventional classification systems? Spoiler alert, the answer is yes. And why is this such an important topic? Well, a lot of times people are like, you stop eating processed food, and we toss around eat whole foods and all this stuff. We need to understand, what does that mean? Because there's a lot of people just yelling and no one really is on the same page. So we're going to work together to hopefully be on the same page by the end of this discussion. So how do we classify processed foods? Well, there is actually a NOVA food classification system which categorizes food into 4 distinct different categories, from unprocessed all the way down to ultra processed. So let's start off on the left side of the screen talking about the unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So that's going to be stuff all the way over here in green, right? So these are things in their natural state. Essentially, it's foods that either were grown in the ground, fall from a tree, or were raised and had a mother at some point in time. It's just natural food products, right? So it's going to be vegetables, fruits, chicken, beef, eggs, nuts, milk. Very simple. And then you move to the next portion, which is going to be the yellow section, which is the processed culinary ingredients. So these are things that are obtained from the unprocessed or minimally processed foods, and they're used to season and cook and create delicious culinary desserts. So you can think about like salt and sugar, butter and other fats and even some oils. And then we get into the orange zone, right? And this is the processed foods. And processed foods are essentially what happens when the first 2 categories have a baby, and then you end up trying to create a lot for mass distribution. Okay, so this is going to be something that you need to store. So it could be canned or bottled vegetables or meats. It's going to be like the fruits and the syrup. You got breads and cheeses, purees, and different types of pastes. And then you get into the ultra processed section, which is really the whole point of this whole presentation. And the ultra processed is going to be a category which has foods that are essentially ready to eat, ready to heat. You don't have to try much to make the food, but the problem is there's not really much real food ingredients in these types of products a lot of times. A lot of times these things have a lot of food additives, cosmetic products that you would never actually eat in a normal setting. They have a huge list of ingredients that you can't pronounce. A couple of examples of foods that fall into this category would be things like cookies and ice creams, ready-to-eat meals, like the hamburgers that McDonald's used to sell, which wasn't even real meat, like nuggets, and a lot of that vegan frozen stuff that people think is healthy. This falls into that category. Another thing is, as you can see from the last paragraph, salt, sugar, and fat are common ingredients added to ultra-processed foods that are in higher concentrations than typically in processed foods. But what is also characteristic of these products is that the food substances that are not traditionally in culinary use, such as plant protein isolates, mechanically separated meat, modified starches and oils, and additives with cosmetic functions such as colorants and flavors and flavor enhancers and emulsifiers and non-sugar sweeteners are also in your ultra-processed foods. And as we talked about in the previous presentation, we were not born to eat that type of stuff because it didn't exist not too long ago, and humans are a pretty young species. So if you wonder why you have GI distress and you're not eating minimally processed foods, this is probably why. How does ultra-processed food impact how much we eat? That's a good question. There was actually a study done by Kevin Hall and friends where they asked this specific question. So this is what they did. They had 20 individuals and they split them into 2 groups. And each group was assigned to a specific diet. One diet was ultra-processed, the other diet was unprocessed. And they were told, hey, you know what? YOLO, eat as much as you want. And then after 2 weeks of doing that, they flipped them so that people that were taking the ultra-processed diet switched to the other diet. And they were not told to restrict calories or eat. They were just told to eat as much as you want, to eat till you feel comfortable, which is what most of us do, right? They weren't tracking anything. Well, the results were very interesting. Individuals that were in the ultra-processed group ate on average over 500 more calories per day and they gained 0.9 kgs in 2 weeks. Okay? 0.9 kgs is about 2.2 pounds for you Americans. So 2.2 pounds in 2 weeks. At the end of a month, that's 4 pounds. At the end of a year, that's 48 pounds. Simply because of the difference in the diet. So a lot of times when we look at people that have a little bit more extra cushion or extra fat on their body, you might think they're gluttonous, they're eating so much. It's only really 500 extra calories a day. 300 to 500 calories extra a day will make you 50 plus pounds overweight. Obviously, your body's going to try to fight against that a little bit, but it doesn't take much more. And it's the quality of your food, because most people are not neurotic with tracking everything. It's simply the quality of your food. If you're eating poor quality, ultra processed food that's hyper palatable, which means you're going to want to eat more of it, tastes delicious, but it's not nutritious, it's so easy to overeat. And this study was a direct example. So why is it so easy to overconsume calories from processed food? It's very simple. This processing of the food makes it very quick and easy to consume. You can just throw in a Hot Pocket, you could just throw in anything, the microwave, and it's ready and you eat it, right? But the problem is, this food you don't need to chew very often. It's really just powder that's been redesigned to look like something. So when it gets into your system, you rapidly absorb it and it spikes your blood sugar. It's really easy to overeat because you don't get the signals to tell yourself that, hey, slow down, because you're not chewing most of your food anymore, right? Think about any processed food. What processed food is harder to eat than a steak that requires you to put this much effort into chewing as a steak? Very little. Okay. Most stuff is just very soft. Another thing is, a lot of these processed foods, because they're designed by scientists, are designed to activate brain regions related to reward and motivation. There's this whole concept of having like a bliss point where something has the perfect amount of saltiness and sweetness and texture. So that way you just want to keep coming back for more. Okay. And then you have to add into that, there's the aggressive marketing component. We've all been sitting around watching like a football game, and then what happens? We see a pizza and we're like, dang, now I want a pizza. Or we'll see a fast food spot. No, now I want a fast food spot. And back in the day, not too long ago, you actually had to drive there. But now you can have someone drive there for you and bring it back. All you have to do is pick up your phone. So that's just making things worse. And then there's low cost of production for the producer and the consumer, right? So it's cheaper. It is cheaper to eat unhealthy. It's cheaper to eat ultra processed foods because it's not real food. There's not much effort that has to go into it versus when you're eating whole foods. Now, what are the potential harms of ultra processed food? Because one of the things we need to understand is, I don't want to hate on processed foods like it's not beneficial, because it did help a lot of people get food into their system at a low cost. And if you have a busy mother, a busy father that doesn't have the time to prepare meals for you, it provided an answer for that. But we've gotten a little too far, because a lot of the things that we're eating, because they're not real foods and there's so many random things in these foods, are affecting our health. We have higher rates of colorectal cancer now. Okay. And this is cancers of your colon. Your colon's part of your intestine. Okay. So it's part of your digestive system. I wonder why that's going up. All right. Then we have higher rates of obesity, higher rates of high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, and then irritable bowel syndrome. Okay. All these things can be linked to eating too much ultra processed foods. Now, I just wanted to bring up a couple of different components of ultra processed foods to be aware of, so that way maybe you can make a decision on whether or not you want to have lots of this in your diet. So one component of ultra processed foods is emulsifiers. So emulsifiers are added to food to improve their taste, their texture, but most importantly, their shelf life and their appearance. Okay. So what they do is they essentially prevent the separations of foods. Because imagine if you were to take a fruit, like a tangerine, you throw it in the freezer, you take it out, it's no longer a tangerine. Because of the water and the fiber in there, things have exploded, right? Now, with ultra processed foods, things stay the same way, regardless if it's in cold or hot. And that is why, because of emulsifiers. All right. There's different types of emulsifiers. You got lecithin, xanthan gum, carrageenan, diglyceride, polysorbate 80, and carboxymethylcellulose. Bunch of cool names. But I would recommend you read the back of your labels and see if any of these things are in there, especially carrageenan, polysorbate 80, and carboxymethylcellulose. Those have been linked to being potentially dangerous. So when you look at this study that talks about food emulsifiers and metabolic syndrome, you see that certain food emulsifiers, which they put on the left side of the screen, the carboxymethylcellulose, the carrageenan, glycerol monolaurate, polysorbate 80, these things lead to a chronic inflammatory state in the gut. Okay. And one of the reasons why is because if you look at this diagram, here you have the lumen, you have the mucus layer, right? And what it is thought is that these emulsifiers actually decrease the production of this mucus, which potentially leads to disruption of these cells that are supposed to have what are called tight junctions. So these cells are supposed to be next to each other. They're not supposed to be any gaps. And when you have these gaps and you have a disruption of the intercellular junction, you can have bacteria that's up here translocate down here. And guess what this is? So that's into your bloodstream, right? And that could lead to a potential chronic inflammatory state, okay? And this is thought to be a cause of certain autoimmune conditions and stuff like that. You're not supposed to expose this bacteria to this part of your body. And eating foods that are highly processed does that. Another component is trans fats. Trans fats have been removed from a lot of food items, which is great. And the reason why they even existed is they're easy to use, they're inexpensive, and they last a long time. It was a way for many restaurants to be able to deep fry foods without having to change their oils. So it was essentially very great for the food companies that wanted to have commercial fryers. And now, if you're eating fried foods or commercially baked goods or ultra processed foods or even margarine, which we used to be told was healthy, you're getting some trans fats, which there's no argument. Everyone's on board. I know there's a lot of nutrition arguments. Everyone is pretty much on board with trans fats are not good for you. So your body doesn't know what to do with them. So stop. Just don't eat this type of stuff. So what are the dangers of trans fat? So trans fats are known to raise your LDL cholesterol without a corresponding rise in your HDL. So certain fats can actually raise your HDL and LDL. This does not do that. It just raises your LDL cholesterol. And there's been a strong association between trans fats and increased risk of inflammation, heart disease, and cancer. So you want to avoid this as much as possible. Does that mean you can't have fries? You can't have fast foods? No, you can. If you want fast food, make it yourself, right? And you won't have these issues. What are some nutrition rules to live by? Number one, cook. There's a large generation of people that do not cook their own food, and I'm sorry, that's just not the way to go. If you cannot afford a meal prep company or you cannot afford to go to restaurants with healthier, home-cooked type meals, then you need to cook, because then you can enjoy all these different flavors without the negative consequences. You want to also avoid food that makes health claims. I remember, they still have these stupid cereal boxes that say, supports heart health. No cereal is supporting heart health, okay? I'm sorry. It's a lie. That is a bold-faced lie. You don't need an apple to tell you it's healthy for you. So the fact that they're going out of their way to telling you it's good it's BS. And then you want to avoid foods that have more than 5 ingredients for the most part. You can have them on occasion, but if you're going over 4, 5, 6, 7 ingredients, it's not real food. That's just it's super ultra processed. And then you want to avoid food products with ingredients that no ordinary human would keep in their pantry. So if you can't pronounce it, you don't got it as seasoning, why are you eating it? Because it's in your food. You want to avoid things that have high fructose corn syrup, because it's just one of the worst types of sugars for your body. And then you want to avoid foods that have some form of sugar listed as one of their top 3 ingredients. And then you want to avoid food products with the words light or the terms low fat or non-fat in them, because it's very misleading. And that means if it's light or low fat anything, it means it's high sugar most likely, right? Otherwise, you ain't going to eat it because it's not going to taste that great. And then you want to eat foods that eventually will rot, because that is a normal response. Things live and they die. They should not be shelf stable for forever, right? And if you want to eat junk foods, cook it yourself. It's not that hard. I love burgers and fries. And then here are a couple more rules to live by. Make your diet based on unprocessed or minimally processed foods, mostly plants, a variety of them that are sustainably produced. Have some meat, get your protein in. And then you want to season, mix, and cook these foods with small amounts of processed culinary ingredients. You can add a little butter to some things, occasionally add some salt, some fats, not too much sugar, and make things taste good. Make the foods that you make taste good, and you'll have so much more of an appreciation for cooking. Cooking is fun. Just try it. And then you want to enjoy small amounts of processed foods, such as bread and cheese, and as part of your healthier meals, right? Don't eat just bread, right? Don't you can have some of these processed things, the bakery items, but sparingly, not for every meal, and maybe not for every day. And then you want to avoid ultra processed foods or consume them in moderation. And the moderation is going to differ depending on where you are in your journey. If you're someone that's relatively lean, your blood biomarkers look good, you don't really have too many health issues, your moderation is going to be a little bit higher than somebody that already has type 2 diabetes, hypertension, has all these health issues, there's on lots of medications. You need to bring that down. Your moderation should be a lot lower because your goal is to get to a good baseline of health. And these foods make it so much harder because, like we mentioned, you're going to overeat if you're consuming ultra processed foods as part of your regular diet. So hopefully you enjoyed this lesson. If you have any questions, please drop a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer it.